Hi, I'm Artyom, an IT journalist and the podcast host here at Anywhere Club. And my guest today is Douglas Crockford, creator of JSON data format and the legend in JavaScript community. We will speak about JavaScript and why we should stop using it, about new language alternative to JavaScript, which Douglas currently working on, and many more. But before we begin, please check the website of Anywhere Club, aw.club. It's a digital platform for a global community of IT professionals, and you can find a lot of useful things there. So, hi Douglas, how's your day?
Hi, day's going great.
Oh, glad to hear that.
I'm working on developing a programming language, and I'm writing a book about mathematics.
Wow, your programming language. Can you tell me more about this, or it's a secret information?
It's not secret. It's on my website. The name of the language is Misty.
Misty.
And it is an actor language. It might be the language that replaces JavaScript.
Wow, sounds like a plan. Do you think it will succeed?
I don't know. I don't even know that I'll ever finish it. I've been working on this language for 40 years.
Oh, wow.
And I'm constantly changing my mind about things and getting smarter about things. And so I add things and I remove things. And I've tried to implement it several times, but each time before I get it running, I get a better idea. And so I keep starting over. So that's why I call it Misty, because it is vaporware. And I don't promise that I'll ever get it finished. But just the process of working on it informs me a lot about what the problems actually are. And I think makes me a better designer and a critic of other languages.
Wow. And what's the big idea behind it? What's the great idea that you're working on right now?
The big one here is taking, I guess, great ideas from three different languages, from Scheme, from Erlang, and from ActorScript, which was a language designed by Carl Hewitt, and sort of putting them all together in a way which I think will be easy to use and effective and reliable and secure.
So that was my last question that I planned, but let's talk about now.
All right.
Why do you think we should stop using JavaScript, and why do we should replace it?
So obviously JavaScript should be replaced. The language comes with a whole lot of problems. And that was a consequence of it, of two things. One, of the first version of it being designed and implemented in 10 days.
Yeah.
That's, I'm spending years designing mine. So there is some benefit to doing it in days, because it means that you can finish it and ship it. And that's definitely good. My designs aren't helping anybody at the moment. But you can make a lot of mistakes in 10 days. There's no time. There is no opportunity to do refinement, to do testing of the language, to improve it. And then it very quickly got released in that form and then cemented into a standard. And since then, the standard has continued to be designed by a committee. And so you see a language design going in all these different ways. Some of them are not very friendly to each other. And it's just this big pile of mistakes with some really deep and intense brilliance, which is why it's an interesting language and why people should learn it and use it. But it shouldn't be the last language, right? We should be able to take the next step. This should not be the last step. So you think about, okay, what is the next step? What is progress? And most people, when they think about the next language, they're either thinking of little features or they're thinking of syntax. And that's not where the big step is. The step is going to be the next paradigm. And I think the next paradigm wants to be secure distributed programming, because that's how the world works now. All of the previous programming paradigms all the computation happened in one machine. And all of our languages are designed to that understanding of where computation takes place. And that was fine for a long time, but today the world is very distributed. There are computers all over the place, and they all need to talk to each other. And our programming languages don't understand that. They're not really compatible with that reality. So I think that's the next step forward.
Yeah, but it's so difficult to leave it behind. It's so many programs, so many, the whole internet works in JavaScript. And
it's always been that way.
Yeah.
That there have been several of these steps forward since the beginning of programming, and they always come with a lot of controversy. They always come with a lot of hurt feelings and arguments, and they always come with leaving the previous generation behind. It's happened every time. And this one will be the same. And some people will understand the benefit of the next system and move forward with it, and some people will not. And that's to be expected.
Yeah. But I'm afraid the difficulties in a modern time it's not questions of just technology. It's about business today. So many corporations, a lot of services are working on it, and it will be really hard for them to leave the technology behind and bring the new one.
Well, you look at what happened to MGM, the casino business in Las Vegas. They got hacked, and their systems still haven't recovered yet.
Well,
so they're losing enormous amounts of money because someone didn't understand how to secure something. And all of the businesses are facing exactly the same worry that at any time some breach could occur or some weakness will be found in their website, or we don't even know where the problem's going to be. And then they're going to suffer tremendously. And none of the corporations asked for this environment, right? It just kind of was there, and they adopted it because they didn't think they had any choice. But they are all now seriously at risk and scared. So I think if we can present a better opportunity, the corporations are not going to be the problem. I think it's the programmers who are going to be the problem, because they're not going to want to move.
I agree. I agree. Do you remember the time when you realized that we should stop and bring something new?
Oh, that's a really good question. I should have a date, because that was probably an important moment, at least for me, but I don't remember specifically when it happened. I do recall saying things like Internet Explorer should die. That was a problem. We needed to move past that. And it was probably a slow process for me too, because I have a lot invested in JavaScript. I'm famous for it. I've written a couple of books about it.
Yes.
So usually when someone becomes a leader in any particular technology, they become a defender of it as well.
Usually,
because their income is dependent on that thing going on. I didn't do that, so I can see, on the horizon, there is something better than JavaScript. And that should be obvious, right? Because JavaScript has so many problems. Something that has the good parts of JavaScript, none of the bad parts, and the stuff that we need to take the next step. I think that should be the next language. And I don't remember when I thought that would be, but I'm convinced of it now.
Do you think it should be, the new language should be comfortable to move from JavaScript to the new language, or so should we mention JavaScript and all the old projects when we think about a replacement for JavaScript?
Well, the next language, I think, is going to be all about message passing. So the way programs communicate with each other across the network, or even within one machine, is by sending messages. And if you're working in JavaScript, you're already comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's how web browsers work, right? Events are messages. So you're getting messages from the user through the IO system. In Node.js, you're getting messages from the network, right? And messages from the file system and whatever else you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're effective in those domains, you're already halfway there. You're much better off than people who are working in, C++ or some other crappy language. They don't have the experience that the JavaScript people have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's still a lot to unlearn and relearn, but people who are good at JavaScript will be ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm. Do you work alone on this Misty language?
I am working alone.
Mm. Maybe don't you think that you should use help of open source community or anybody?
I should. I feel that I need to have more of my stuff together before I can ask other people to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
If I invite too many people in too early, then I think it'll just end up in chaos. It needs to be something that is recognizable as the thing that we want to contribute to,
Mm-hmm.
in order to help focus, because in an open source project, people have lots of reasons for why they might want to contribute, but you hope something they all have in common is we like this thing and we want to see it go.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't know at the outset what the thing is, then the project can easily fly apart. So I don't feel that I'm at the point of the project yet where I can invite lots of others in.
What do you think about all the environment around JavaScript, all the frameworks and everything? We should just leave it behind with JavaScript and stop using all of that?
Eventually, so like in 10 years, I'd like to see JavaScript go extinct. But, for people who are working now, that's not an option, right? They need to be able to work with it. There was a time when I recommended that people use libraries of some sort with JavaScript, that just writing to the DOM was too painful and labor intensive. And we saw a lot of good libraries evolve. But then two things happened. One is that the frameworks got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are now massive, grotesque, bloated, enormous things. And they're really slow, and just moving them across the wire is taking a long time. And sometimes they're loading a huge thing because they need to do a little bit of stuff, and it all goes over. And sometimes you spend a lot of effort trying to make it come over in chunks because it's too slow to send it all at once, but that makes things even more. So that happened. And the other thing that happened was the web standards finally got good.
Mm-hmm.
When I started working with the web standards were horrible. They were really quite bad. And that's why we needed the libraries, because you didn't want to write directly to the DOM because it was buggy and weird and not portable and awful. But the DOM is good now. So I don't use any frameworks or libraries anymore. I write straight to the DOM because the DOM works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still far from perfect. It's a goofy design, but it works. And that's enough for me. So if you're working on a site and the site is, I guess, committed to one of those awful frameworks, you're stuck. They're really hard to get rid of because you've got all this code that depends on the framework.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad I don't have to do web development anymore.
I think it's a dream
because it's hard.
For many
web
people.
Development is really hard now.
Yeah.
I thought it was hard when I was doing it because the browsers were so bad and the standards were so weak and everything was incompatible and things that should work didn't.
Mm-hmm.
All those problems got fixed, but there are now all these new problems based on the frameworks, which looked like they were going to be a solution, but had become a bigger problem.
Yeah, I agree. And what do you think about all this Uh, all about types, about TypeScript or Google's Dart or anything else.
Yeah, I don't need it. It doesn't solve a problem that I have.
But it became, I think,
A
really
lot of people like
popular.
it. They got used to it working with Java and C#, and so they wanted to be able to do that stuff in JavaScript. And I did Java before I did JavaScript, and so when I started in JavaScript, I was really nervous all the time because I didn't have the types, and I worried I could accidentally be passing something into something, and it's not going to know what it is, and it's going to get weird and stuff. And I worried about that for a long time. And then I noticed some things. One was that while the people advocating types say it makes your programs a lot more reliable, you still have to test them.
Yeah.
Right. So the types don't really work, do they? You still have to test. And I found I was doing the same effort to test JavaScript as I was testing Java.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I'm not experiencing any benefit. So the way I added it up, the type system gets credit for the errors that it finds, and it deserves that credit. But I find those immediately. I mean, those generally aren't the problems. The bugs that keep you up at night aren't the ones that the type checker finds. So they're the really bad bugs the type checker doesn't find. And we don't blame the type checker, right? We blame you. So, but that's not right. And then there's some bugs that are caused because of the type checker, that there's something you need to do, and the type checker doesn't understand what you're trying to do and says, no, you can't do that. And you work around it. And now you're in this really dangerous area, right, where you're breaking rules and things go bad. And you should never do that. But if you're working in a strongly typed system, you're doing that all the time. You have to, otherwise you can't get your work done. So when you add it all up, the bugs found, great. The bugs not found, bad. The bugs caused, bad. I don't see a lot of benefit in it.
It's such a controversial topic.
Oh, yeah, people love it. And I understand why they love it, because I used to sing in that church. But my experience with JavaScript convinced me that types are overrated. I'm not saying that they're useless or bad. I think they have a benefit, but I think the benefit is not nearly as good as is claimed.
In your new language, will be types, or it will be more like JavaScript?
Well, JavaScript has types. JavaScript has lots of types. It has numbers and strings and objects and arrays and stuff. There are lots of types in JavaScript. And Misty has lots of types too.
My question was, it will be more like TypeScript or JavaScript?
Yeah, it'll be more like JavaScript.
Can you tell me, do you remember the most interesting time in your career? What was it? The most interesting project in your career or something like that?
I think maybe the most interesting time in I've had a lot of interesting times in my career.
Oh, yeah.
Working at Atari, the game company, doing research there. That was a really interesting couple of years. And then I went to work for Lucasfilm.
Wow.
And that was a great place to work. Then I went to work for Paramount, and that was really interesting. And then I started a company where I was the president and CEO, and that was an amazing experience. I loved doing that. I loved all the people I worked with there. And I started another company, and that was another great experience. So those were all real high parts for me. Then from there, I went to work at Yahoo for several years, and then at PayPal for several years. And at both, I had the privilege of being allowed to work on my own stuff. So that was great. So I got the advantages of working in those companies, and they were really good companies, but I had the freedom to do anything that I wanted to. And so those were high points. And now I'm working for myself, and I'm really enjoying that too. So pretty much my whole career has been high points.
And it's true. And it's true. I believe you. But it's such a different places and industries even. About it, Atari, I know such little about it. I only remember those old games, and I remember the story about the game Extraterrestrial, which
ET, yeah,
was really bad,
which
and
they buried in the desert in New Mexico.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true. So I've been a programmer for many years, and I really enjoyed it. And I had always wanted to have a computer because it just seemed, I'm a programmer, that's something I should have. And for the first part of my career, that was impossible. Computers were just way too expensive. I remember one year at the company I was working, I had a job review, and I did really good on the review, and they were offering me a lot more money. And I asked, could I have one of our computers instead? They said, no, you can't have one of our computers.
It's a pity.
First off, the cost of the computer was more than they were going to pay me. But second off, it made them really nervous to think that their employees could be owning their own computers at home, and who knows what they were going to do with them. So that was a concern. They just couldn't understand why I would want to do that. Then one Christmas, the Apple II and the Atari 800 became available. And I looked at them both and decided I liked the Atari 800 better. So I took it home and tried to figure out what I could do with it. I remember it cost $1,000 for the computer and $1,000 for the floppy disk drive that came with it.
Wow. The same price for computer and floppy disk drive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have bought one with one credit card and bought the other with the other credit card. So I took them home, and my first idea was to design a programming language for it. But the memory was small, and the processor was a 6502, which was maybe the worst of the cheap 8-bit processors. And I couldn't figure out how I could generate code that would fit in that tiny memory. So I gave up on it. And I thought I would try to do a word processor for it, and that I couldn't figure out how to make that work either. So I looked at, well, what's this thing good for? Obviously for playing games. So I wrote a game, and I sold it to Atari, and that got me an interview, and I ended up working in their research laboratory.
So you developed a game alone by yourself?
Yeah, that's how you did it. In those days, you did everything, right? You would design the game, you would do the graphics, you would do the sound effects, you would do the music.
Yeah, it's impossible nowadays.
One person does everything that there is to do. It's so different than games are now, where it's basically a studio, and you might have hundreds of people working on all these little specialties that go into the game. In those days, it was just one person. And at Atari, that's how it worked for them too. For people working on the VCS 2600, generally there'd be one programmer who would build the game and do all the graphics and all the sound effects and everything. And when he was done, he'd submit it, and then marketing would take it and design a box for it and an ad campaign, and then get printed into a cartridge.
So you have a game that's being sold. It's every people can play it and can buy it. It was made by Atari.
You can't buy it now, but there was a game that you could buy.
Was it successful?
It was for me. It made a little bit of money for me. I don't know I don't know how it sold. Atari never told me the numbers. But the important thing was it got me a job.
Yeah, that's great. And what was your job really? What is
my job was working in research. So I worked on a lot of interesting things. I worked on graphics. I uh, figured out a fill algorithm. We used to have fill algorithms back then for filling up planes, and I made one that was really fast. I figured out how to do fractional pixels.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a pixel that was bigger or smaller than a real pixel, and making all that geometry work.
Wow.
I worked on interactive music. I created a program for teaching ear training for recognizing intervals, like octaves and perfect fourths and minor thirds and that kind of stuff. I worked on the design of a next generation computer, something to replace the 800 family, and worked on the design of the graphic chip that would also be in that computer. Well, I worked on a lot of interesting things there.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. But have you seen the modern video games? All the technologies like ray tracing and so on. It's almost
it's
like
absolutely amazing. Yeah,
photorealistic.
we used to dream about doing stuff like that. We wanted our games to look like that, and there was no way because we only had 2 bits per pixel, and we only had, let's see, in the VCS there was only I think 4K. So there was no memory, and so we would try to do that. So at Lucasfilm we had a game called Rescue on Fractalus, where you fly through mountains on a planet and look for survivors of a space battle, and you go around and rescue them while you're being shot at. It was a really good game. And you look at it today and it's really quite awful and primitive. But at the time, it was state of the art. Nobody had figured out how to do that on an 8-bit processor before.
I played one game which was made in 80s, I think. I'm afraid to be wrong, but it's a French game, maybe. It's called Another World. Do you remember it? Do you know it?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, it was such a great experience. It was interactive storytelling, and it looked slow, almost impossible for me. Wow, I was a kid when I saw it on a computer. And recently I played Cyberpunk, and I look at it, and it's impossible. It's impossible. It's so photorealistic. It's so
right. And the game technology has gotten so good that it is now being used to make movies and TV shows, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And how did you get in Lucasfilm and the film industry?
So there was a connection between Lucasfilm and Atari. So when Atari melted down after E.T., I was recruited by Lucasfilm, and so I ended up working there. And initially I worked in the games group. So the games group was making video games under the Lucasfilm label, and worked with a brilliant team there. Then we started doing educational projects. So I led a project with Apple Computer and National Geographic Society, developing an interactive video disc for classroom instruction, and edited a video editing system to help make that system. And then worked on a location-based system. So basically, you would walk into a room which was the cockpit of an X-Wing, and you would have this infinity display in front of you, and you would go fly around on this planet.
Yeah. So, it sounds really interesting, but my first thought was maybe you worked at Star Wars production.
No, I didn't actually work in the movies. I worked in stuff around the movies. I also looked at entertainment systems, and I would review them and determine if the company should be interested in that or not. Because in those days, there were a lot of proposals or candidates for new entertainment systems.
Mm-hmm.
Blu-ray turned out to be one of them, and it won, but there were lots of others, and most of them, weren't that good, and we shouldn't waste our time on it. So I would make the determination as to whether we wanted to invest in those or not.
Okay. And next, you found your own company. After that.
Well, next I went to Paramount. I helped them set up a media laboratory,
Mm-hmm.
and then I founded my own company. So a couple of guys who I had worked with at Lucasfilm, and I started something called Electric Communities. We thought that the internet was going to be a big thing. At that time, it wasn't obvious that it was going to be that. And yeah, it was different then. We hadn't gotten to the point where it was obvious how it was going to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it's how else could it happen, right? And we saw it that way, but not very many other people saw it that way. So we thought that people would want to do business, and people would want to socialize in that network. And so we created a company to support doing that.
Mm-hmm. Was it difficult for you? So you was an employee in a company, and now you're almost a businessman. You run your own company. Was it difficult for you?
Well, there are challenges, obviously, but it was a lot of fun. We'd gotten to the point where we had an idea of what it was we wanted to build. So we were farther along than I am with Misty. Mm-hmm. And then we started recruiting people to come work on it with us, and then going out and raising venture capital to help fund it. And I think raising the money was the hardest part, because you have to go and meet with these people and tell them your story, and that's hard to do. And those meetings are always uncomfortable. But we did okay. That company went for about 8 years. Mm-hmm. The thing that took it down was when the dot-com bubble collapsed in 2001 or late 2000. It took us with it.
Wow. Yeah, I heard a lot of stories about this bubble.com. Yeah. And next, Yahoo was your next step, right?
No, my next one was called State Software. Uh-huh. So that one was in 2001. So during Electric Communities, we figured out that we could use JavaScript to do single-page applications in the web browser, which nobody else was doing at the time. And so we developed a system in JavaScript and in Java on the server side. So you could have applications with multiple users all in one space, sharing information, collaborating, working together. Mm-hmm. And it was brilliant. So we were doing that stuff way before that became popular.
Mm-hmm. Am I correct? Is this the place where you invented JSON?
That's right. That's where I discovered JSON.
Okay.
I don't say invented because it already existed in nature.
That's an interesting point of view. Yeah.
Like I didn't invent oxygen,
Okay.
But you could discover oxygen. Mm-hmm. So JSON was already there. I gave it a name and wrote a specification for it. And so I did that because at the time, XML was clearly the standard. Mm-hmm. And we looked at XML for exchanging data between the browser and the server, and it was just ridiculously complicated and not what we wanted at all. So I got this idea that we could use a subset of JavaScript, and that made a lot of things much easier. Mm-hmm. And we would tell our potential customers, and we use this thing to move the data back and forth. And they say, well, is it XML? And we said, no, it's not XML. It's much better. We go, Oh, but it's not a standard. Oh, so I bought the domain name JSON.org
Uh-huh.
and I declared it was a standard, and it was so. So
That's it. Simple as that.
that's it. I did virtually no work to establish the standard.
Mhm.
It happened by itself. And I just made a website and a page. And when Ajax happened in 2005 and people finally got out doing JavaScript in browsers,
Mhm.
um, and they were told, and use XML, and they go, oh, that can't be right. There must be an easier way to do it. And there
Mhm.
obviously was. And so JSON took off.
Mhm.
So now if you look at Google Trends and compare the popularity of XML and JSON,
Mhm.
there's no question JSON has
Yeah.
moved way ahead of XML.
Mhm. What do you think about it now?
About JSON?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Isn't
think
it?
it was great. I'm really pleased that it has gone for so many years without any change.
Mhm.
Not many standards that can do that. So it's been about 20 years that we've had a JSON standard,
Mhm.
and it's been solid the whole time. And I'm hoping that it'll be like that till the end of time. So if you look at the stack, there are all these layers in the stack, and a lot of them, especially the top layers, are changing all the time. And so you get incompatibilities when the frameworks change and stuff like that. But the
Mhm.
JSON layer, it's always going to work. Once you get that working, it's done. That's always going to be okay.
Even
So,
even even in times when we will stop using JavaScript, JSON will be
yeah,
okay.
because JSON isn't about JavaScript. That's where it
Mhm.
started. But you could use it between any pair of languages.
Mhm.
So JavaScript doesn't have to be one of them.
Okay.
Now, in my work going forward, um, I'm not using JSON. I'm using um, another thing. It's not called JSON. It'll be called something else. And it adds a couple of new types that I need for doing the distributed systems in a secure way,
Mhm.
which were not needed for JavaScript. And so that's why they weren't in JSON. But um, the Misty system will also use JSON where it's appropriate.
Okay. It's, how do you feel? Uh, what is your biggest contribution in technologies in IT industry?
Oh, it's clearly the JSON thing. Um, and a really amazing thing that one person can establish a world standard.
Mhm.
So uh, it became so popular that the other standards bodies needed it to be formalized as they understand formalization so that the new standards that they were making that were dependent on JSON could refer to it.
Mhm.
So I wrote a standard for ECMA, which became ECMA 404, which is the official JSON standard. And ISO adopted that standard.
Mhm.
So, I made an ISO standard, just me. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Sounds amazing. And how do you feel about it? It's so interesting to hear. How do you feel about it? You made the great thing, the legendary thing that everybody uses. How do you feel about it?
Oh,
Do,
it's
do,
great. The reason I did it was so that I could use it
Mhm.
because I had all these people yelling at me saying, um, you have to use XML. You can't do that because it's not a standard.
Mhm.
So, I made it a standard and the problem went away.
How do you think the Misty language will be the next big thing for you?
I'm not confident that the Misty language will be big. Um, I think generally you get to do one big thing if you're lucky.
Mhm.
Most people aren't that lucky, but the people who are lucky, like Brendan Eich made a great language.
Mhm.
And I think he definitely, from that experience, he could make an even better language. but he could not get it adopted. It would never be as successful as JavaScript. You don't get to be that lucky twice.
Mm-hmm.
Like Nicholas Firth did the Pascal language. I think that was in the 70s. And it was a huge, very, very popular. He then made successors to it, Modula and Modula 2, much better languages, no success.
Mm-hmm.
So you only get one. And I've had mine. I might get lucky twice with Misty, but I'm not counting on that. Nobody's that lucky. What I'm hoping to do instead is to influence somebody. So if there's someone who is smarter and more talented than me, who can look at what I did with Misty and go, I know what to do, and can take it forward, correct the mistakes that I'm making, and add some additional insight to take it to the next level,
Mm-hmm.
I will consider that a success. It doesn't need to have my name on it. I just would like to see progress happen.
What do you think about all that hype around modern AI systems, language models, and generative AI and everything?
Yeah, so I've been around AI for a long time. So AI was also very hot in the 80s,
Yeah.
but and that was after 2 decades of work. It was thought, in the 60s, Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy at MIT were doing all this stuff, and lots of other smart people.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we got to the 80s, it looked like this is finally going to go mainstream. They were getting a lot of investment. All this stuff was going to happen. And their model of AI was very different than the one we have now. They were going after it from the direction of understanding. So you would have some way of encoding knowledge, and another way of analyzing that and using it to generate results.
Mm-hmm.
And it failed. It was just too hard. Figuring out how to encode knowledge in a general way, it was just too difficult, too immense. Nobody understands how people think. And basically what they were trying to do is replicate the way people think. And it just was too difficult.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing now. What we're doing now with neural nets is a very clever pattern matching system, where after you've seen a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
then you can respond to a similar thing. And they were doing that back in the 80s too. Neural nets were happening then. The difficulty was that you needed a huge amount of data to train your neural net.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really expensive to curate that much data.
Yeah.
What we have today is big data, right? So you can just hook your neural net up to the internet and throw all this crap at it, and it will see amazing things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can organize all that stuff, and it can feed it back to you, which is great and amazing, but also it's terrible and disgusting sometimes, right? Because there's a lot of ugliness on the internet, and a lot of error in the internet.
Yeah.
Grace Murray Hopper warned us about errors, and we're kind of seeing that now in the AI. If they get fed garbage, then garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one concern about the AIs, that they're going to rise up and enslave us. I'm not real worried about that.
Sounds like sci-fi movie, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great theme for a sci-fi movie. We've been doing that at least since 2001. And, well, Robbie the Robot was kind of dangerous in Forbidden Planet. So, and the robot in Metropolis was kind of dangerous too. So, there's for a long time been this worry about, what happens when the machines get smart. But that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is that these things are not smart. they're very clever, but they're not smart.
Yeah, I get it.
And we look at them, and sometimes they give you ingenious results, and you go, wow, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so you imagine, how would I do that? Or how would a human do that? And how much intelligence and experience you would need in order to come up with a similar result. Except that's not how they did it. They did it with tricks.
Mm-hmm.
And they cannot even tell us how they did that. You can't ask, how did you figure that out? It doesn't know. It just, you run these numbers through the network and numbers come back and that's the result. It doesn't know why. But when they do the good stuff, it's really impressive. And my concern is that those systems will be put into roles where they're really not competent and should not be trusted. For example, they might get put into human resources roles, where they're going to be making decisions about employee behavior or making decisions about who we should hire or not. And who knows what they're actually looking for. Now, it turns out humans are really bad at that stuff too. So,
Yes.
So it's clearly not a perfect world. And maybe that could be a motivation for why you'd want to turn it over to the machines instead.
Mm-hmm.
But I would rather take my chances with the humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes not. But there was a term AI winter from the 80s when expectations was high, the hype was on the big level, and everything collapsed. No investments, and nowadays AI became mainstream, but the expectations from it are even much higher. There's so many expectations from AI that it will replace everything and solve all our problems. But I think it will
we
not
also
happen.
saw sort of an AI arms race
Mm-hmm.
where Microsoft buys the Chat GPT stuff and pushes it to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And Google had stuff which they thought clearly wasn't ready, but now they need to be in a competitive situation with Microsoft. So they're pushing their stuff and they know it's too early.
Mm-hmm.
And there are there's startups who are trying to leap ahead of them. All this stuff is happening too fast.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern isn't with the AIs themselves, but about the misapplication of them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because they look so smart, but they really aren't. It's difficult to make good judgments about them.
Mm-hmm. Have you tried something like assistant for programming, like Copilot or even ChatGPT?
I haven't. I've talked to friends who said sometimes it's good and sometimes it's frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to do the good and frustrations on my own.
Yeah. But do you think it will be popular in the future?
Well, so much of what we do is repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, people have been looking at, well, how can we automate some of that stuff? Some of the reasons why that stuff is competitive is because our languages are the wrong languages.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just say something once and have that work, right? You have to do it in all these different places. So maybe if we got better at designing our languages, then the AIs wouldn't give us as much benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's, routine stuff, generally they're not bad at that.
Yeah. And what about the far future? My concern is if we will try to use AI more and more, maybe the programmers of the future will be not as skilled as we want them to be. So much work will be.
We're seeing that now. I mean, you like in the web world, you see people who are really good at the frameworks
Yeah.
who don't know a thing about JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
right? So generally, I like to see everybody be a lot better at doing their jobs, whatever that would be.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't want to be better. They got their skills up to a point where they got hired and they're comfortable where they are at, and they're just going to coast. And that's one of the things that makes innovation difficult for us,
Mhm.
because you've got people who are comfortable, and innovation is uncomfortable because it means you're not the expert in your field anymore. You're a novice again, and you're competing with all the younger novices. And,
Mhm.
that's hard and intimidating. People don't like that. That doesn't feel good. But that's how we innovate. Particularly in our profession, we like to think we love innovation, but we hate innovation. We really don't want to innovate too much, because then we have to start over, and we don't want to have to start over.
So maybe we should try to learn AI so AI could innovate for us, make innovation for us.
Yeah. So, so the thing about AI making programs, the thing that makes programming so difficult, and it's maybe the most difficult thing that humans do, is that it has to be perfect. A computer program has to be perfect in every aspect, for all inputs, for all time,
Mhm.
right? If it's not perfect in all of those ways, our contract with the computer says if the program is not perfect, the computer is allowed to do the worst possible thing at the worst possible time, and it's not the computer's fault. Whose fault is it?
I
It's your
think
fault.
yes, and so I think a lot of modern JavaScript developers will disagree about perfection.
Uh, but it still stands that
Mhm.
programs should be perfect.
Yeah.
And so, but they can't be perfect for a couple of reasons. One is when things get too complex, it just gets too hard and we can't do it. But the other is we cannot test for perfection.
Mhm.
We like to talk about how wonderful test-driven development is, but all that does is tell you that you passed the tests. The tests are not proof that it's perfect.
Mhm.
We have no way of recognizing if a complex piece of code is perfect. And most likely it is not perfect, and we put it into production anyway,
Mhm.
with the hope that we'll find the imperfections before it fails. That's insane, right? But
Sounds
that's what we
insane.
do.
Yeah.
That's what we do, because we don't know how to do better than that. So if somehow we can figure out a way to have the AIs help us get better at perfection,
Mhm.
then I'd be all for it. That would be great. So we're seeing AI doing the low level stuff. Like, I'm too tired to edit that for me. So
Mhm.
sometimes they can do that okay. But I'm more interested in the higher level stuff. Like, how do I know that this whole system is actually coherent and regular and good, that it's not going to fail in unexpected ways? Is AI smart enough to figure that stuff out? In
Mhm.
its current form, I think no, not at all. But I'd like to think that they could. You know, um, I'd like them to do the thing that we wish types were doing for us that they don't.
Mhm.
If somehow AI could be doing that for us instead, I think that would be great. But I'm not aware of anybody working in that direction.
Maybe someday. And what is your opinion about AI being an open source? Should it be an open source so anybody can do anything with AI? Or some people say we should invent something so we can control AI before put it in open source. What is
I think
your
it's too
opinion?
late. I mean, the basic algorithms have been out there for decades.
Hmm.
So mostly it's, um, you know, getting enough money to build a big enough server farm that you can do the training and there are companies who are now busy building chips to bring the cost of those farms way down.
Mhm.
So maybe that's the point where you'd want to control it. Let people do their little software experiments, but not allow the silicon makers to accelerate it.
Mhm.
So yeah, open source is good.